Welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co host, John Mickton. Uh, all of us in international schools move. It's one of the things that we do. We go from country to country, job to job. And sometimes it is a opportunity to try a new professional context. Maybe we're on a professional journey to go into leadership, and we may start as an assistant principal and then see opportunities to become a principal or even head of school. Or maybe you're an educator and you've been in one country in one type of school and you're thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to go to another school? And international school recruitment is, of course, complex. It can be super stressful. It often requires a lot of preamble, working on your resume, who you are, kind of sharing your pedagogical compass. And there are many different moving parts. Of course, there's the fact that you might moving to a country that you're not familiar with, so the cultural impact, and also maybe into a new school, so new school culture, maybe a different curriculum. And most often of us, we're coming with partners, spouses, and family members. So when you put that all together, it's quite complex. It's definitely an emotional roller coaster, but can also be super exciting and can be a wonderful way to enrich in our own professional journeys by working with different leaders, different communities of international schools in different cultural contexts. And all of these have their richnesses and their wonders, but with that always comes some cautions and some challenges and maybe some reflections that bring about maybe some second thinking. So as you engage with this process, of course, you really need to kind of be well prepared, be it in your own decision that you're about to move, maybe doing some research about the school, the country, or even maybe thinking of strategies, maybe talking to recruitment agencies or talking to a mentor or making those contacts through your professional learning network. If you think of all these things to do, it's almost like a full-time job. And I am super excited and we're privileged because today we have what I consider one of the global experts in this field and who's been involved, which is interesting also in industry and education. And that's really interesting. We'll delve into a bit of that. Is Pauline O'Brien, who's the Director of Global Recruitment Strategies and Leadership at the International School Services. And she's worked with many organizations. I doubt there's an international school leader that doesn't know her or has encountered her at one of the conferences, but we're really excited to have her here and kind of delve into this topic of international school recruitment. So, Pauline, thank you so much. I know how busy you are. You just shared where you've been and come from. So, thank you for taking the time in your busy schedule to come and talk to us.
Hi, John. It's an absolute pleasure. You know me a little bit, and you know that if I can talk about recruitment, I'm always really happy. And so I will always welcome a conversation that perhaps shares some tips and resources to folks out there that will help their career journey.
Thank you. So, one of the things I would like to kind of start off with is this idea that there are generations of different leaders. We've maybe had a generation that was the baby boomer leader, and now we're shifting maybe more to millennial or generation X. There are these different labels, but there is no doubt there is always a transition. And I personally feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel we're coming into this because the baby boomers, example me, I'm coming at the end of my career, and of course, other people are there, ready, excited to take these roles on and be part of this community. Tell me, what have you noticed in the approaches that have influenced your school, international school recruitment, with these generational shifts? And how are you aligning these changes with the needs of the customers that you have, which are international schools?
It's such a great question, John, and something that keeps me busy day in, day out as I speak to boards of trustees, to senior leadership when they are recruiting as well, because things have changed. Leadership models have changed, and we've learned a lot. And I'll just talk about, the last decade in international education for me, because that's been my primary experience. I think generational shifts are reshaping the expectations, and their priorities are shifting. Um, you labeled lots of people there, lots of generations. I'm just going to use, those starting their career, those in middle career, and those in their career, let's say. And I'm going to start with, let's say, senior leaders. I see the generation coming through now to take up their first head of school role, or yeah, let's talk about those. No longer do they want to be the only one leading the school, taking all decisions by themselves. There is absolutely a sense of distributive leadership, and that more input, different perspectives will actually enhance a decision in a school, and therefore be the right decision to support students in their learning, because ultimately that's what we're there for. So while a head of school absolutely needs to have a broad showcase of experiences around marketing, finance, admissions, pedagogy, clearly, curriculum, all of those things, governance, etc., no longer do they have to be the expert in everything, right? So I see this generation saying, I need to seek expertise that's going to help me. And I don't need a clone of myself. I need people, around me who bring different skills, competencies, etc., to the table, so that our decision making is more robust and more thoughtful, and that that the buck doesn't just stop with me. And obviously it does, but I think you get the sense of what I mean, that leaders are also willing to learn from others, and that's a big piece in recruiting, that people say, what's the professional development available to me as a senior leader? Because often it's a lonely place, isn't it? It's,
Yeah.
you're by yourself. There are things you can discuss, things you can't discuss. And so we see a lot of leadership candidates taking a coach now, and not a coach necessarily on how to do their job, but just a coach to speak to around their own development. So we see that a shift, so that not only the distributed leadership piece, but also that coaching piece. For the younger generation, then, let's say those coming into middle leadership, and younger educators, they're looking for more flexibility. And of course, the pandemic showed us that even in schools, we can be a little more flexible than we thought we could be. And so we're seeing that young educators are really looking for a school that's going to provide a really supportive working environment for their needs, their professional development, but also their personal needs. We see those in leadership who perhaps have families, have different expectations as well, and are looking for that flexibility around working conditions, clearly knowing you've got to be in school. There's no one debating that. But what is the flexibility around that? And I'm seeing different models around the world. That some leaders are having a work from home day every other week, or a focus day on particular things. So we are seeing a shift. It's no longer everybody at school all the time.
It's so interesting that you talk about this idea of distributed leadership, and then also talking about this idea of educators wanting to know about the professional development. How are they going to be able to learn? And you mentioned this idea of coaching. And actually, I have the privilege of coaching some leaders, and it is not about leadership. It's more just having a sparring partner to air things out and have somebody ask the kind of questions that allows people to do some deep reflection. Do you think also the nature of the job has changed? Because you did mention marketing, admissions, curriculum, governance, maybe even some local politics. Do you think the way international schools have grown and the way the world is changing, before you could be a solo act? But now, because of the complexity and so many different skill sets that are required, as you alluded to, people are willing to say, I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to get the right people around me. Do you think it's changed that significantly?
I would say change, maybe developed. There is huge competition out there as well in terms of schools. There are many more international schools these days than 20 years ago. And so to stay ahead of the game and to make sure that your school, is the school of choice, you have to be thinking about all of these things. It is important that you know your place in the market. And I'm sounding very business-like now, and many educators don't like that. But you do need to know your place in the market. And that's what your board will be looking at as well. Are we the school of choice? And how do you go about finding that out? Also, is our school a safe place for students to come to, and therefore what sort of relationships and which relationships should we be building in the community to make sure that we have the right relationships with law enforcement and with special services outside of school, so that it's just school leadership is really complex. And whether you are leading pedagogy curriculum is really different to if you're running the whole school and leading the whole school. And I think that has been highlighted more in my time. And I think it's been highlighted more because people have seen the challenges and experiences the challenges that have sometimes not worked out well for them. And so, that reflection piece, as you talked about, when people reflect, they say, actually, I didn't know enough about X, and so I really need to upskill myself on that topic, or finance, marketing, whatever that is. So I think it has changed. I think we're also bringing more non-educators into schools as professionals. I see that those schools who have the resources to bring in the marketing professionals, and we all know the business managers, they've been around for a while, but we are bringing in whole teams of professionals now to schools. Advancement is a title that's come up, and of course people and culture has come up as well. So we see these new roles where heads of schools are saying, I actually need support from experts to make sure that we're doing this correctly.
So this dynamic of international schools is something that you have been involved with for, and I correct me if I'm wrong, about 10 years. But you came from industry, and in industry you were doing the same thing, recruiting. And I'm curious, they are very likely two very different entities, and what makes international school leadership so distinctly different than, say, when you were recruiting international business people to work in different cultural contexts, different companies? What would you say is the differentiator between those two dynamics?
I think for the majority of school leaders, it's about the children and not about the bottom line. I
Yeah.
think that's the fundamental difference, and that might sound a little cliche, but ultimately that is the difference. International schools largely are caring communities. Anyone who goes into an international school will be talked about coming into the family. In industry, you have that as well, somewhat in family businesses, but not necessarily in the big the multinationals or the huge corporations that I would have once worked for. Also, you're moving people around the world. So you're not just moving that person for that position. You could be potentially moving, a whole family. And so the consideration that's given to recruitment, it goes far deeper than someone who's been recruited for industry nationally. Now, I do not want to devalue that recruitment either. It's just different, right? It's a different consideration. And so when I came into international education, I was focused on, the head of school, going for that head of school role. And then, they start to talk about their family. And I thought, that's really nice that they're sharing all this information about their family. That's really kind. And gosh, very trusting, to share all this information. But it took me a while to get my head around why, because I'm thinking, but you're going to be doing the job, not your family. But
Yeah,
the more I got to understand international schools, the more I realized that piece is equally crucial, because an unhappy person at home or an unhappy family, it's just not going to make the person who's leading the school have the best circumstances to be able to, share their magic.
yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. Also, I think the as you highlighted, even though I don't think it's cliche, is the idea when you're dealing with children, it's a whole different dynamic because there is no bottom line as such.
Yeah.
It's far more nuanced and really delicate. you hear a lot about, oh, there's going to be a shortage of teachers and a shortage of leaders, and you see more and more schools open up, for profit, nonprofit. Do you see, as you're working in this field and looking for candidates, do you see kind of an issue that there are less candidates and more positions, or does it depend if you're more into teaching while in leadership? I'm just curious, what are you seeing? Because you hear a lot of talk about this.
Yeah, that's one thing I have got to used to as well in international schools is a lot of talk about everything. And so, and that can become, the what people think and believe because that's what the talk is.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm probably a little controversial as I answer this question. So my experience coming into the recruitment fairs was really interesting at the time because we would invite all of these heads of schools who would come and recruit, and they would expect long lines in front of their tables. And I was saying, but can you not give me your vacancies before you come to my fair, and then I can make sure that there's five maths teachers in front of you, or six humanities teachers, or whatever that is. And that was really difficult the first year for me because I was like, why is no one sending me their vacancies? But I realized, and it's back then, things have shifted, now, but back then people were going from one fair to the other. And depending on their success rates at those recruitment fairs, determined which vacancies were over when they got to my fair at the time. And this was a whole new system for me because I was used to, having a pipeline and building a pipeline for my clients and having, multiple candidates ready when they would come and recruit. So the notion that there has to be lots of people to speak with to find that right candidate is still something that exists today. And I remember
Interesting.
having a conversation with a head of school once who said, while I was at the time, my competitors' fair, and they said, oh, there were 20 people in front of my table, and I only had five at your fair in front of my table. And I said, okay. And of the 20, how many did you or were you prepared to interview? Oh, just four. I said, okay. And of the five, how many did you want to interview? Oh, all five. Okay, and of the 4 and the 5, how many did you want? And I, dug deeper into this, and then this head of school said to me, "My goodness, I've never thought about it like that." It's about ratio and percentages and success rates, and for me, it's not about the numbers, it's about the quality of the candidates you put in a space. And, at ISS, we are debating this every week. You know, I don't mind if we have 10,000, 4,000, or 400 candidates in the database, as long as they're screened, vetted, and quality candidates that are meeting the needs of our schools. And so, and to elaborate a little bit more, heads of schools are used to, going into the databases and looking for the candidates themselves. That's something that was new to me as well, because you don't see that happening in industry. Right, you see those of the HR folks that are doing those initial screening and getting, as it were, a shortlist ready for the senior leadership to look at, but they're doing a lot of that pre-work. I see a shift in that in schools as well over the last 10 years. But typically leaders are going in to search these databases, where in my experience I would have done that work for them and put those that were needed. So even though I say to people, like, what would be the ideal if we could put the 20 top candidates in your inbox for that particular vacancy, would that be great? And everyone says yes, but they're still going into search in case they find something themselves. So it's kind of habitual. It's the way it has developed. um, and it's developed quite quickly in a way, because I remember when I came into the Council of International Schools, CIS, some 10 years ago, and people were talking about the 24/7 database. And I did not get the significance of that. Again, initially, I was like, what's this with this 20? Like, I was used to a 24/7 database. That's how we worked, right? But in schools, this was again a new thing that people didn't have to submit their paperwork every single year again, right? They could actually now
Ah,
file their stuff on a database that would be there for, until they secured their position. So if it wasn't this year, it was still there for next year, and your references were there, etc., etc. So it's interesting to see this shift in recruitment. And I discuss this with heads of schools all the time, like what would be the ideal for you, and it's different for different people. It's different depending on where you are in the world. It depends on the type of school you work at. There's so many different factors that you can't say, okay, this is it, this is the way to do it for all of our international schools. If I could figure that out, John, I would have done so by now.
What's interesting is you're talking about, kind of a transition from a way that was done before and your own pathway to understanding these differences. And we know if we look today, with COVID, suddenly there were no more there was suddenly not ability to have face-to-face recruitment. So a lot of organizations start doing the online and then came back with the offline. And today we kind of have this hybrid. You are also seeing more and more young startup recruitment agencies showing up, maybe more specific to one area, for example, maybe IT or maybe HR in international schools. Tell me, do you feel as an organization having the hybrid is essential, or it doesn't matter if it's hybrid or online?
Absolutely hybrid. And I have been gathering some anecdotal data on this recently as well. Since our in-person events came back, I've been hearing from heads of school and actually from boards as well that they may not have hired the people they hired online if they had seen them first.
Interesting. So the
And
physicality is
they said
important.
that's not disingenuous to other people, but just that personal. So you can do a lot of pre-work online, and one should. That's a time saver. But particularly for these really important head of school roles and leadership roles, all roles are important. But those ones, people said, no, we really want to keep the in person.
Do you think that's the same case for teachers?
So again, interesting point, John. I've just come back from an ISS recruitment fair in Washington, D.C. And this fair would have enjoyed hundreds and hundreds of teachers in the past. And now we were hoping to get our numbers above 100, right? Because this younger generation has not had that in-person experience per se. So they don't quite understand the value of an in-person event yet. So if I
Interesting.
think about the first timers that were at this particular fair, I would say half of the folks there were first timers. And to see them, I think that's the best at a fair, to be honest, to see them walking around and their eyes opening wider and wider as they understand this wonderful world we work in, and that they engaged in conversations with multiple schools rather than the one school they were focused on coming to speak with. It's you can see that these younger folks that were there at the fair, they could see the value, and they said they never would have known that before if they didn't come.
How interesting. And
However, this younger generation is predominantly used to being recruited online.
interesting. And so I take it as your organization, ISS, you do the hybrid. So you have online fairs and then physical in-person fairs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And do you target a different audience, or it's the same audience and it just depends on maybe generational or the candidate's capacity to show up physically?
We're always opening, our doors to whoever is interested in international education, who's qualified. We've always done that. We're also trying to make sure that we have candidates that are going to be given the opportunity that may not have been given the opportunity before now, when we may have gone traditionally for a different type of teacher. We're absolutely opening and have done for quite some time to say, come join us and learn about this world. Our professional development courses online also has some modules that say, come and learn about international education and what's out there for you, because to expect somebody to move overseas just like that, I don't think that generation does that anymore. I think in the past maybe my generation did and before me just went for it. I think the generation now thinks more methodically and is planning more methodically. What does that mean for me and my future?
And as you said, you're recruiting many teachers and everything. And one of the things that I know there was a lot of discussion and self reflection is that international schools, and I'm going to be just candid, had a problem with diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And it was quite obvious. And if you went to heads of schools or leadership conferences or a lot of conferences, even educators, it tended to be more Anglophone, North American, or Australian English, and there was not that diversity. I know that's something that you have been very much involved with. How how was that shift, and where do you think we are today in that process? Because I know that's quite a big change, and change takes time, and you're an organization that's agile. But tell us a bit about what you noticed and where you think we are today on that.
Have we made progress? Yes. Have we made enough progress? No. However, efforts are and continue to be made. I think we first had to understand and open our world to understand what we didn't know that we didn't know. And I think a lot of school, no, not think, I know a lot of schools around the world have been doing stellar work on that, as have we inside ISS. The Diversity Collaborative was started back in 2017 by members of ISS who realized that the landscape of international education wasn't as it should be, so that students could see themselves reflected in classroom teachers, in leaders of school, and so on. I think we will continue to make steps take steps to enhance the candidate pool for those we work with. And it still remains a high priority for us.
In that same vein, because you are also been very much involved with women in education leadership, and I know that's something that's close to your heart, and you're often involved in a lot of other organizations, really promoting this idea of women in leadership. What about with women in leadership? Do you think we've made more progress in that area, or is it a different type of dynamic so it can't be compared?
Thank you for recognizing that, John. Indeed, it is a huge passion project for me, and I'm very grateful and thankful to the organizations I've worked with to allow me do all that extracurricular, if you like. And that's something that's been encouraged. So when it comes to women in leadership, and my time and the time I can allocate to those special projects, if you like, is precious and very well received by all the organizations I'm able to support and help. I see a shift in applications from women leaders. And in some of the recent searches we did over the summer, we saw a 60-40% in
Wow.
applications. So that has improved. What hasn't improved is women being appointed to the most senior leadership position.
Okay.
There has been a shift. It's improved, but it's not improved as much as we hoped. But there is absolutely a shift there. And from all the work I am doing in this space, and I've had the pleasure of working across continents, so in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and in the US, in various women in leadership, promoting bodies and chapters. Women are talking and coming forward and reflecting and realizing what they need to do to step up into these positions. And as importantly, men are being more intentional about tapping women on the shoulders to say, you should think about going for this. So there's plenty of allyship out there. And that's something we talk about a lot: mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship for women leaders. Absolutely a shift. And, I was recently at a Women Ed event, and I talked about the language that female leaders use during their application process and interview process. And it doesn't always focus on AI or finance or cultural competence. It will talk around those softer skills. And so I've been encouraging women to think about that. And it's not that women can't talk about that, but that's not the initial first topic that will come up. It will be about students, it will be about pedagogy. And I may sound generalizing at the moment, but that's what I see through my experience. And so and women said to me at this event, they said, oh gosh, I would never have thought about talking about technology or AI at this point, but actually I've been doing this, and this. So it's just looking at those areas where assumptions could be made that females may not have the capacity or the competencies to do something because traditionally that wasn't the case.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're talking about recruitment, often, and you've mentioned this so far in our conversations, the board of governors, the board of trustees, who usually the director then is accountable for. They're the entity that's hiring the director in most cases. Would you say, as in your role, that sometimes you are in need of educating the boards because they might have a profile of a candidate that they have in their head, but you knowing the school and being in the industry and understanding many of the dynamics and having many contacts through other heads of schools and educators and teachers that you work with, how much often are you in a situation where you actually have to try to get them to pivot their thinking?
I hope no board members are listening to this podcast, John.
Sorry, we can edit this out if you want.
No, not at all, not at all. I would say in every search that I do, we encourage boards to really look at their thinking and challenge in a good way to say, why do you think that? We will often do a SWOT analysis with a board, and go through what they thought with them. And that's the beauty of the work we do is setting off on a journey to hire a head of school with a particular vision in mind. And then at the end, them having actually I won't say do a 360-degree turn, absolutely not, because a lot of board of trustees knows their schools well. But of course, they're in the situation and they have bias within the situation, which is absolutely natural and normal. And so for us just to shine a different light on things sometimes can help and really develop a profile to really enhance the type of skills and competencies that they're going to get in their school, in their next school leader. Working with boards is really a wonderful thing to do, and the passion and the commitment and the drive these volunteers have for their school is really, really commendable. And it's always a joy when they know they've hired well, to see that they go, phew, because it's quite a responsibility, isn't it?
It's a huge responsibility, and also I think it's a good reminder to remind ourselves these are volunteers that often are very busy in their own professional context. How
Absolutely.
much do you feel that sometimes cultural context can be a challenge in the process?
Absolutely is a challenge in every process as well, because it's not just the person who's being hired, their culture, and it's not just the culture of the board or the culture of, there are many different layers. There's culture of school, culture of country where school is, culture, of the person being hired, but also what is their culture at home. That could be very different as well. So it's like an onion that you've got to kind of peel back and peel back and peel back. And once there's understanding for culture and understanding, how a particular culture takes a decision, how a particular culture likes to get consensus, you have to spend work on this. And this is something that we certainly work hard with boards. And
So as you're talking and it's obvious that in your role as a recruiter and running a big organization like ISS Global Recruitment, and you're working and hiring teachers and middle level leaders and the heads of schools, What do you feel is the hardest thing for somebody in your role and your colleagues that are looking at candidates that are coming in? What is the thing that maybe you find the most challenging in this kind of dynamic that you are working with?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think um, that there's lots of things to think about. Getting to know a candidate well is probably the most, getting to know the school, the board well, then the candidate, really understanding their strategies. And are they looking for a job, or are they looking for this particular job? Or has this been their dream job and they've been waiting for it to come up? Right. So there are many different levels. And for us to get to the bottom of that and to really understand a candidate's motivation for them, for their personal circumstances, etc., that helps us be able to guide the candidate as well to say, I know that you've wanted to get into this school, but really, your skills, your competencies, your background, while stellar where you are now, will not match this new school. I think that's probably the hardest thing we have to do, because there are amazing candidates out there with fantastic skills, and I'll often have people reach out to me and say, why did you not consider me for that role? And that's a hard one, right? Because you have to unpack that. And everyone in international education is also really, really kind and considerate and humble. And so, giving absolutely direct feedback is not something that happens readily. However, I am a believer in that. And I do try not ever to be rude or unprofessional or whatever, but to really guide people appropriately. And I have to say that I usually, people are very grateful for that. They'll say, thank you so much for that, because no one's told me that before, or, no one's highlighted that before. So I really appreciate it.
I think you bring up a really good point, because having recruited people and been an administrator and also been recruited, I think that's the one thing often I found people very hesitant to give you feedback, because they think they might be stepping on toes or this might backfire on them. But I think as a candidate, being able to get that and take that on board and use that as a learning opportunity, I think is so important. So yeah, it's so nice to hear that, you know, even everybody's kind, you're comfortable sometimes being, I think it's not an issue of being mean, it's just being realistic and being candid to help them as a added benefit as they continue that search. You know, there's no doubt, if you're a candidate and you're going, say, to ISS, be it a teacher, you talked about really getting to know the first timers, understanding that not used to the kind of face-to-face interviews, they're used to the online, and then the amount of time you spend with candidates and boards. There's a lot of work that you and your team do. It's hours of work, it's people work, it's coaching, mentoring, being a sounding board. There is a pattern, and you do hear that some candidates say, you know what, I'm not going with a recruitment agency. I'm going to leverage my professional learning network. I'm going to work with the HR team in the school and kind of work things out. And some schools do that, and they have robust HR teams. Other schools might not, but they do have this idea that they can do it on their own. Talk to me a bit about why people think that and where they might be wrong.
I think that people feel that if they go directly to a school, that they'll be seen and maybe given a better chance,
Ah, okay.
because they think, if I go directly to the school, then I'm not in the pool of X amount of candidates with a recruitment agency. Whereas a school will say, and a school board will often say to us, you know the industry, you know these people, you have experience with these people. We don't know the education field. We know our field, we know our school, but we need your insights into this as to how we can understand the skills and competencies of the people that you put forward. And for us, it's about, as I alluded to earlier, for us, it's about making sure that we're finding skills, competencies, attitudes, attributes for this particular school that we're working with, and not just in general.
Interesting.
That's really crucial, and I think that's what makes the best placements, if I'm honest, John, is when you go into that detail. And I really am glad that you recognize, the hours and hours that goes into this work. It really is a lot of hours, and work that's done behind the scenes as well, right? It's particularly in an organization, and I have to say I love my team. They are selfless in the amount of hours and support they give to candidates, I have to say.
And then I think, for many of us who are international school educators and leaders, I think that is quite obvious. When you have that background or an organization like yours behind, there are just so many things you can talk about and ask questions, which maybe a school doesn't want to hear 9 billion questions, but you're willing to listen to 9 billion questions. And I think that's really something so important. Do you, there's the talk of nonprofit and profit. I assume you recruit for both. Is there a difference when you're recruiting for a profit school and a nonprofit school, or at the end of the day, it's a school?
A great question again. I attended a workshop at the AIE conference in Washington, D.C. just recently about this. And there was robust debate about what people think about a non-profit and for-profit school. For me, there is a budget in both. For me, it's a business in both, whether it's a for-profit or not for profit. And so for us as recruiting, the only difference is the entrepreneurial skills that a head of school would have to have in a for-profit and the language one would have. And I think many heads of school have these abilities. Of course, they have these abilities. They're running schools. But there's this notion of, for profit, then the revenue generated is going to be used for something else. There are so many for-profit schools out there who just reinvest the profits back into the school. But they're not shy in saying we want efficiencies, we want good use of our budgets, we want to make sure that our spending is that we look at that carefully, that we consider investments, etc. But there is a notion that for some for-profits, it's all about filling someone else's pockets for them to go off and have a lavish lifestyle, let's say.
Yeah.
Out there, absolutely out there, but there's such a difference in all the different models. School groups, for instance, individual, I know of some for-profit schools where there are philanthropists who are giving back to society and therefore starting these schools because they want children who may have been underprivileged to have the beauty and the wealth of an international education.
Thank you for that. I just think it's always so important to get that balanced view because I think, again, sometimes there are misconceptions about for profit schools. And often teachers in nonprofit schools or educators often think that there is that narrative that you shared, which I think you're saying quite clearly is not accurate.
I'll add just one thing, John, if I may, to that as well.
Please, of course.
I think the difference for-profit schools as well is that there's an absolute measurement piece. And so teachers are measured as to their effectiveness. They may have the dreaded things called KPIs,
Yeah.
rather than aspirational goals, right?
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
think there's just more clarity around performance, not only from the leaders, teachers, and students. And so it's more clear, it's more upfront that, these are your deliverables. And if you don't make those deliverables, there are consequences. I think that there is the same to be said in not-for-profit schools. It's just not as it's just not phrased in that way. It's just
Yeah.
not as upfront in that way.
And I think the word aspirational is a great example of the vocabulary that might be used compared to KPIs. Yeah.
Yes.
So, the world is changing, schools are changing. We are all aware, and I'm sure I know you are because we've met and had many conversations at the last conference that we were at, where, there's this accelerated change. What do you foresee if you had to look at the crystal ball and say, where is recruiting going? Is it we going to continue with this, or are things changing so differently? HR might start using artificial intelligence to sift through resumes. You might decide to do that. I don't know. What are you anticipating? I'm sure as any organization, you have a strategic vision. You're thinking 2030 or whatever it might be. What are some things that are kind of perking up your attention and saying, wow, these are shifts and changes that we need to be mindful of?
I think AI is here and staying and growing. And so we have to embrace that and we have to use that to the best of our abilities. However, recruiting people is a people's work. And so I think we can use all of this technology to support that work. But I still think that we will always remain, as far as I can see now, we will always remain intact to do some level of that work. And at the moment, it looks it's the final piece of that work, all the pre-screen and etc. We can use all of these tools, and I know that there are some folks out there developing tools around AI for recruiting. I've seen these shifts. When I came in 10 years ago, I was told, oh, the fairs are a thing of the past, and the fairs are still going. In fact, they've come back.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, it's interesting.
And if you think about, I don't know how many years ago, I think it might be 18, or you'll know this better than I am, that we didn't, what were apps on our phone, right?
Yeah.
Now we can't think of a world without an app on our phone. So I think we will move with the times. We will go, we will absolutely go with the flow. And I think if we can bring in some efficiencies by using technology, that is absolutely fantastic, because that also reflects in budgets. And then perhaps there's more budget to do that in-person stuff. I think recruiting for us at ISS continues to be always paired with professional development and sharing of knowledge. So our fair was just not a rat race, as in run into the hall, queue up, get the job. We had professional learning sessions going on throughout our event, and have done for years, that really help educators firstly learn what do they need to know, to teach in international school, but furthermore, developing other skills. We had coaching sessions last week for leaders at our fair. So we're really looking at, we're taking our view is, if we're taking heads of school out of, or middle leaders or divisional leaders out of school to an event, we have to make it worthwhile for them as well.
Yeah, and I just love the idea. And I know because I have been to your fairs quite a few years ago. And the professional development component is so interesting because basically there are opportunities to gain new tools and strategies as you're engaging with this process. And I think that's really important. And with the wealth of knowledge, and you're involved in many other aspects of education and professional development, I think that's just so important, and really applaud you guys for doing that. Pauline, it's just been wonderful. And one of the things that we always ask our guests is, as we wrap up this conversation, what is one thing you would want to share with an educator that might be thinking, it's right now, it's March, so kind of the season's over. But some people might be thinking about next year, definitely school leaders. They're in the spring, they might be thinking already for 26, 27. That's how far ahead. I mean, sometimes it's 18 months. And educators might be saying, oh, it's spring, but I'm thinking in October, November, I'm going to maybe decide to move on. What is one just, I don't know, advice or guidance that you think people should reflect upon when they're that? And then also for a school leader that might be hiring or be in that process themselves.
We could do another hour on that, John.
I know. We will.
I would say it isn't as cyclical as it used to be, where the recruitment was October to February. I think it's year round now.
Interesting.
Really think it's year round, and I think it used to be that if you were still available in February, then perhaps you weren't the best candidate out there. I think that has changed as well. I think there is a notion that people would like to get their recruitment done as soon as possible for the next year so that they can focus on other things in school, and I totally get that. I would say for educators, know yourself, your strengths, know the environment that you'll shine in, and have your aspirations, but also your values, what's important to you, and do your research. Don't just go to a school because a friend said that was a great school. That's an extra endorsement. Find out if this is really the school for you. And actually the same advice for leaders as well. But I would say for leaders to again know their strengths, know their competencies and so on, and have evidence of impact of your work. Really think
Interesting,
about
yeah.
what is the evidence of the impact of your work. One of the first interviews I did with a school leader, I've been a leader here, I've been a leader there, and I've done this and I've done it's great. I said, so, and how successful were you at that school? Oh, I was very successful. Okay. And could you outline for me what that success looked like, please? I was successful. Yes, but now we've moved on along from that, of course. But what I'm getting to is to have examples of, and I don't mean every minutia that you did, but I mean the really impactful things as a teacher, middle leader, counselor, librarian, whatever your profession is, to know the impact. And if you don't know that, go and seek that information. So ask people around you, what would you say my greatest impact is here? Ask leaders, what do you think is my greatest impact? And know that, because that really gives you a strong vision, values of where you're going next when you know that information. And equally to know where you need to develop, to have that self-reflection. In the industry days, it used to be tell us about your weaknesses, and I really don't like that. That's one thing I really like about international education. We don't focus on that. But what are your areas of growth, and how do you see you growing, and what are the tools you need to be able to grow? Because that helps the school saying, can we resource this? Do we have the capacity? So we want this expertise, and oh yes, they need to grow in this, but we have the capacity to help someone.
And I think this idea that you bring up of being able to self-reflect and grow is also a way of showing a positive vulnerability, that there's the capacity to get feedback and take it and do something with it, which I think for a lot, I'm sure for you as a recruiter, but for boards too, because there's a dialogue back and forth. So I
Absolutely.
think that's so important. Thank you so much, Pauline, for all your share outs and your reflections. And then also hats off to you, because I know you are very busy as a recruiter, but you're very much involved with women. Ed, you're also been involved with child protection and safe recruitment. So you are somebody that really is passionate about education at multiple levels. So I just want to tip my hat to you for all the work that you do. And I know when we got to spend time, it was just great to catch up and just talk about so many interesting things. I want to remind our audience, Pauline O'Brien has left some show notes. A lot of you talk about the show notes, so go in there, you get her biography and some information about ISS. And who knows, you might bump into her at one of the conferences or even at a recruitment fair. And I want to thank again for the feedback. Many of you are sharing out, giving comments, and also writing to us and saying, hey, this and that. That dialogue is so appreciated. Your support, as always, is so appreciated. On that note, Pauline, thank you again, and hopefully you get some respite time from the travel. And we look forward to seeing or hearing or listening or being with our audience next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.